I've done a few repairs on this window. Yeah, there was some rot. I'm just gluing on a piece of wood here. Actually, that's finished gluing. Just put a couple of little tacks in there to help it glue. So there's a little channel here to help it to dry. Those can go off. Bit of tape. Don't want to make any of this stuff too difficult now, do we? I actually used a bit of wood from a different window to do this, some of this repair. The bottom piece here was all rotted out completely. So that's actually is an old one. Another old window. I'll just show you some of the rot that was there. Someone's tried to put in wood cement, which didn't make it better, it made it worse, not better. That doesn't make rot better, it makes it worse, because if the water gets in, it stops it from getting out. Same with all of those kind of modern products. Wherever you put modern stuff, it always makes it worse, not better. Look right on the outside, look, but the water was going down inside the wood and then not coming out. Also, they'd used rubberized putty instead of linseed oil putty. Yeah, so there's a bit of repair in here, and just some extra bits of wood where it was rotten. A little extra piece here, and a little extra piece put on the inside, just enough to get it going. And then there's still some of this rubberized putty, but this is just a minimal thing. So I'm just going to freshen it up a little bit, is what it's all about. A lot of it, I've taken everything that's loose, everywhere I could find any loose putty I've taken it out, and I've taken out any of the loose rubber. Obviously I'd rather get rid of all of the rubber, but the chances of breaking the glass are quite big on these old windows, so there's always a payoff between trying to get rid of something like this rubberized stuff. It's just a thin saw blade then. You know, obviously I don't want to break the glass. It's always a little bit risky with these old windows because the glass is very fragile. See, that pulled the glass up, just pulling out that piece. So I have to be very careful. So I'm going to put a couple of, before I do what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to, because it needs to have a bit of putty behind it, you see, so I'm going to work on the other side in a second, but before I do that I'm going to put a couple of copper pieces in. I just make this out of electrical wire. It's not the thinnest type of electrical wire. It's not 3-phase, not as thick as 3-phase. 2.5 times 2.5 I think it is. And I just cut pieces and then I bang a little flat on it. And then if you're gentle, you can use a chisel, but it can be a good idea just to use a piece of paper underneath the chisel to stop yourself from messing up the glass. Because if you do it wrong, you'll scratch the glass. You can do with a heavier chisel than this, really. I mean, some people have hammers specially made for this, but you need to have a hammer that's got a square edge to get down low enough to do this. Maybe I can use this one. Experimenting here. Just put my finger down on it to push it down a bit lower. The thing is with old windows, the wood is old, so it's hard. It gets harder as it gets older, wood. I don't know quite why. that's why old instruments sound better, isn't it? I suppose. Or glassy, chiming sound. I'm not doing very well there. My favourite chisel for doing this. I don't know quite where that is. This is my favourite chisel for doing this. You see, it's a mortising chisel, has square edges. I think that's what you call it. And you see, that's just you can see if the glass wasn't, if the paper wasn't there, I might scratch up the glass. I mean, I've certainly done it in the past, scratched up the glass. Okay, doesn't need any more. Just wanted one extra. So now, before I put in the new glass here, I've got a couple of pieces. Well, there's one old piece and one new piece I'm going to put in. Before I do that, I'm going to fill up these gaps, all of these gaps here. They need to be full of putty. So I've already scraped them down and I'm just vacuum cleaning a little bit. The reason why I'm doing quite a light repair here is budget based. Not everybody has a massive budget to have things perfectly restored, and it would probably double the price of this repair if I were to take all of the oil paint down to the wood, or prepare it a great deal. But so what I'm concentrating on, see, the paint is good stuff, in a way, but in another way it's not that important, the paint. This window's perfectly alright. Well, at least that's probably a bit of a tall statement, but they do last a long time without any paint on them, because they dry out very quickly. Obviously windows that get wet also need to dry, and the paint on them actually slows that process down a little bit. So this putty's a little bit old. Well, I'm not putting anything underneath the putty here because it's been done before. If it were a new wood that hadn't been treated, I'd put linseed oil down first, let it dry, and then put the putty on. Because the wood that it's never been done before, it sucks the oil out of the putty. So I'll just get rid of the paint if I can. Someone's done these windows before and scratched up the glass. Which was a bit of a shame when that happens, because people are using sandpaper and scraping up the glass, and when I come along and do my work, it looks like maybe I've done it as well. I suppose that's just the way it has to be. Okay, well, as I say, this has had the oil seeped into the wood from the putty before. This is a bit old, this putty, but I've warmed it up in my hands, so it's nice and warm. I just put it in the gap. Just kind of compress it in there a little bit. Different kinds of putty mixes that have to be treated differently, as a kind of, you have to, if it's wet, you maybe, it's not always very easy. You can always use a brush to smooth over the surface a bit. That's alright. Transition from one to the other, but you see there is a transition because the old stuff isn't down to the glass, so I'm just using my fingertip there which is specially adapted in my case, being gnarly. So that's quite important, you see, that filling up that gap there, because you must have putty going down to the glass so that you can paint over the putty and the glass when you paint it. That's what makes it waterproof, and it doesn't stay waterproof for a great long time either. I mean, you know, probably 10 or 15 years probably before it has to be at least seen over, looked at. And then maybe in a minute I'll make up some putty that's got linseed oil in it, to like a kind of milk, putty milk that I can use for filling up gaps. Kind of a liquid version of this stuff. Again, there, just going to kind of get some into the between the old putty and the glass. It's most important along the bottom edge, because that's obviously where the water accumulates. I haven't got my normal putty knife for this, I just can't find it. It's not really the right knife for this. This is an English knife. I think they have perhaps deeper, I don't know why they're shaped like this. I prefer my Norwegian putty knife, which is just kind of square. This old putty, it needs to be compressed a little bit, otherwise it kind of cracks a bit. Okay, a little smoother than the edge. Can even adjust the edge a little bit like that if I want. Okay. It's not a bad idea to do this because you get the grease off the glass, and also actually you can see you can use a little bit of chalk, kind of a little bit of chalk here, and that's quite good because that, you know, just cleans up the glass, so it's less clean up. The amount of times that you clean the glass, obviously you could end up having to clean the glass many times when you're doing work like this. So obviously when you're working by the hour, you don't want to be just doing stuff like that for hours, because it makes the job unnecessarily expensive. To sort of remain competitive, reasonable prices really. Okay, so I'll do this one as well. Yeah, so I'll just fill that edge with my specially adapted finger. Gnarly. In other words, it looks perhaps easier than it is. Because this is old putty, just have to compress it a little bit. It doesn't matter that it's old, because as long as it, you know, as long as it glues down, you can always put a little bit of linseed oil in if you really want to make it even more sticky. That's really not necessary. Or at least that's my opinion. I mean, you know, that might be wrong. You make your own judgment, really. I bet there are people who, if there are people that are glass masters, they probably think this is bullshit from start to finish. But that's alright. That's the nature of YouTube, isn't it? You just have to take it. You decide whether or not it's a reliable source of information or not. And I've seen the results of my own work, and I think it's probably fine just to do it like this. Because even when you're doing brand new windows, it doesn't last forever, this putty. But what's good about it is it doesn't, unlike this plastic stuff, which maybe does last a lot longer. That's possible that the plastic stuff lasts longer than the putty. But that's no good if it rots the wood, is it? Because bearing in mind, these windows, I mean, they're not as old as the house. The house I'm working on is actually from like 1840 or something, or maybe 1820. But these windows, I think, are probably from the 50s, 1950s, new windows. But of course, you're zoomed in, so you're probably seeing more detail than me. Maybe it looks awful. I'm getting worried now that I'm doing it really badly and talking shit. Imposter syndrome. It's maybe healthy to have a bit of imposter syndrome, probably. And the smoother that is down on the glass, the easier it is to paint, because the glass will kind of run down to that edge, and if that's a very broken up edge, the paint doesn't go down as easily into it, and you're more likely to spill the paint. And I'm just going to fill in. Idea. So that bit was difficult, so it's good to show you probably the most difficult bit, because it's easier doing the whole piece normally, but it's quicker to do this than to take out, and also risk, because if you take out all of the putty and redo the glass, then the chances of you breaking it is very big with old glass. It breaks sometimes just when you look at it. Usually if I take out glass like this, it will end up with 20% being broken. That's pretty much what happens, 20%. That's where I've come from. Decided, what I've recognised is the amount it usually breaks out. It's average. So you see that brushing like that gives you a nice crisp edge along that line there, that's where the paint is going to come down on the glass, because the paint goes a millimetre into the glass. That's what makes it waterproof, not the putty. But obviously there's a gap. You can't fill the gap up with paint. Right, here we go. 11 minutes of spabble. Any loose fibres. This time I'm going to use a little bit of cooked linseed oil with a stiff brush. This bottom bit here may never, I don't think it had putty in it, I'm not altogether sure, in which case I think it might have been some kind of greenhouse window. It didn't have putty in it. Well, obviously there's some new wood there, that pine there just using cooked linseed oil because it dries faster than the raw. Raw would go deeper into the wood, but that's not the point. I think you could probably also use shellac. What you don't want to do is to allow the oil to be sucked out of the new putty. That's the point. That's why we're doing this, not because we need to feed the wood or anything. The wood doesn't need feeding. Wood doesn't get any stronger if you put oil in it. Actually, it's more likely to be weaker rather than stronger. There was a period in the 1920s when they used to soak window frames in linseed oil, but I promise you that 1920s windows don't last any longer than the ones that were made in the 1700s that I've worked on. That weren't soaked. So it's just ideas. People have good ideas. They have an idea that they might be better, and so they do it. And then you find out. So this is the beauty of working on old houses, is that you see what happens with time. See what happens with plastic putty. I mean, this window's rotted. There might be 7 or 8 windows in our house that also have plastic putty in them that haven't rotted. This just happened to be a window that was on the side of the house that gets a lot of weather. So you can't make they can't make solid truths. If you've come here looking for truths about all of these building things, I can't give you truths. But I'm happy to not faff too much. I think it's okay not to faff too much. But it's good to put in the effort where you know it's going to make a difference, like getting that bottom edge nice and waterproof on the outside so the water runs off the glass quickly. That definitely does something. And then also on the inside you want to get that nice waterproof at the bottom as well, because the condensate runs down the glass too in old houses. So if the water gets in and you paint it, it's not going to come out. One of the things that we try and do to make windows last longer is use incredibly good quality materials. This is just an example of the piece of wood that I've used. You can see there is what we call in Norway goat wood. It's the outer wood from there to there. And then in there, that's kind of the rosy coloured. That's what we call malmved, which has harpiks in it. And the best bit for windows here is that bit there, not the first few years of growth, but this bit here, from about 20, 30 years, well maybe 15 years out, and then from there to there. That's going to be the best wood. So if you make your windows out of that, they'll probably last long, because the wood's so good. They don't even really need to be painted and it's that good. So now I'm using softer putty which hasn't got bits in it. I've scooped up from the bit of the putty pot that had some clean putty in it, because I don't want bits in this bit, because this is the bit where I'm bedding the glass down into putty, which is what hasn't been done elsewhere on the window. So I mean, you could say, it's good to take out all the glass so that you can do this, but then on the other hand that wouldn't really be very authentic, would it? Because they didn't do it in the first place. Okay, so I've bedded the glass down in putty. I put putty down the edge first after putting down some linseed oil. I'm just getting some of my little copper things, which are, they're not all the same size. Some of them are a little bit smaller, some are a little bit bigger, which is a good thing, because in the middle here I don't want to have such a long one. I want to have as short as possible, because I don't want it to stick out into the outside edge of the bevel of the putty, but I don't either want it to go through all the way through that little bead there. This piece, I don't want to go all the way through that. What's cool about this system is that because you're kind of just hitting it in that direction, you're not hitting down on the glass at all. So it seems to handle more. Be careful with your fingers doing that, because this is very sharp as well. And that one just was going to stick out too far, so I just kind of tipped it sideways. Don't know if you can see that. No, it's just out of camera shot. Sorry. It's good, these copper ones, because they don't rust. So even if someone doesn't want to do any maintenance and the putty falls out, it'll probably crash in 15 years, but it'll probably fall out completely in about 50 or 60 years, something like that. But with these little nails here, made of copper, that'll hold the glass in without any putty at all. My house it's got windows in it that haven't, I haven't done the putty because I'm doing other things. Doesn't really matter. It's on the west side, doesn't get much rain, doesn't do any damage. It's the east side windows on these houses here that get the problem. This is one of the east windows. They're the ones that get the rain, they're the ones that you need to have in good condition, and that they need also more maintenance. Because they just simply, the systems don't last as long, because that's where the hammering rain comes. So, but you still need to put a lot of compression on that to get it to be nice and smooth, even if it is the smooth putty. You see, with my normal putty knife, it's square at the end. This one is for a different system, so I don't really know how to do it, how to use it. And I just think that probably it's likely that in the English tradition these bits are much deeper. But you can see why they wouldn't be deep, because they probably want to save on putty. Putty is, you can make it yourself just with linseed oil and chalk, but it's very difficult to make, and it's not very easy to use handmade putty. It's very often what's called being too long. It's either too long or too short. If it's too short it cracks, if it's too long it just runs. And this product I'm using is a kind of German linseed oil putty, but it's not just linseed oil, is it? It's got all kinds of stuff in it. Who knows what it's got in it to make it so easy to use. It's certainly much easier to use than real putty. I have to move my back. Right, I've got another piece of glass that needs to be cut there because there was a broken pane on this one. Actually no, that wasn't a broken one, I broke it. I broke the pane taking it out. So that's 50% failure on this particular window, because I only took out 2 panes in order to do the woodwork repair. I had to take them out to do the repair. See, I can't get in there with this knife. I was looking around, and I said that I would look for a tool, and I was looking for that nice cutting knife I've got. I've actually got 2 of them. So why I couldn't find the one that was just here about an hour ago, I don't know. It's because I was trying to find the camera, probably. It's probably on the table in the house or something. This is a super lovely old camera. It's the tape. It's a DV tape camera, but it's an old broadcast quality one. So the picture's really nice. But this, I mean, obviously it's not 4K or anything, but it is 1080, and the microphone's quite good. And I don't know if you noticed the kind of reduction in the quality of my films, but that's partly because this camera stopped working or the tape stopped working. So now I found a kind of workaround where I plug it straight into the computer. So it's importing straight into the computer, don't need the tape for that. So it's right for these studio bits. And that, it is quite nice to have nice crisp corners on putty work. It's worth probably putting a little bit of effort into that. I think it's very nice as well that it doesn't have a crispy edge, because if you do let the edge get crispy, it's more difficult to paint. That beautiful smooth edge that we've got there that comes when you do this with the brush like this, that's what we want, because the linseed oil paint, when you paint it, just flows beautifully along that line, and it makes it much easier, faster to paint. So it's worth putting a little bit of effort in now, so that you save time later with the paint. Okay, I'm going to leave that last glass and do that off camera, but I'm going to show you now that I've done some of these. Something that's very important now, and that is, this is making it waterproof on the inside. And when you've bedded the glass in putty like I have on this one, that's easier because the putty's all sticking out, see? So most of that's just going to come off. Just cut out that. But what I'm interested in is having a nice tight line there with no cracks. Because that's what makes it waterproof on the inside when you paint the inside. You don't want to have lots of pits in there going down behind the glass, because they'll just fill up with water, and everywhere they fill up with water like that, and if you've got paint on the outside, it just takes so long to dry out, if it ever does. On the east facing wall, I mean, this summer's been very wet summer, so depends how much you use it as well. Old houses, if you use them a lot, the windows get wetter because of the condensate. And if it wasn't quite full, I can just go in with a bit more putty and just make sure that the gap between the glass and the wood is completely full of putty and it's nice and smooth, which will make painting it lovely. Don't forget, the paint's going to go a millimetre into the glass on the outside, no, on the inside as well as the outside. So you can kind of get those two lines of paint, the one on the inside, the one on the outside, to come to the same level, and that way it looks very good. You can't see the putty when you're outside, and you can't see the putty when you're inside, or the paint or whatever, because it makes unsightly dark lines if you go too far out onto the glass. So from that point of view, it's quite a good idea to paint the inside of the windows first. Okay, there we go. And that can be now just cleaned up with a bit of chalk. Gets the glass clean. Smooths off the putty. There's other marks that could be on the outside. It just kind of polishes up the glass, which is good because when you paint, if you're careful, it'll be less work. the long run. So I'm going to go and do that on all of these, the old ones too. Nice and compressed putty into the gap between the wood and the glass. But particularly the ones at the bottom, they have to be really good. I'll just check where the bottom is. Okay, the bottom is this one and that one. So this one is actually not that important because it points down. So actually you can just, in fact, not bother too much about that one that points down, because that lets the air in for faster drying time. Do it if you want though, because it looks nicer. But see, I'm not doing this for looks, I'm doing it for technical reasons. And I think that's the case with pretty much all, a lot of handwork that people think is beautiful and they try and strive for it to be beautiful. Actually, it's beautiful because it's done well technically. If you think about animals and stuff, how they utilise, like say wings for example, they're beautiful, but I mean that's secondary, isn't it? Their primary thing is that they're functional. And it could be that our ideas of what's beautiful, our conventions of aesthetics actually come from when something looks like it's practical, we also think it's beautiful. Like the Spitfire, for example. That's a good example. It worked very well and people kind of felt that it would work because it was beautiful and that was right. When the camera's not stuck in one place, just move it wherever I need it, of course. Oops. That bottom edge, do you know, I'm not even going to do that, I don't think, or maybe I should. It's just not really necessary doing that. The bit that points down, because it kind of gives you a chance to get air into the wood. When it gets wet, it'll dry out faster if it's like that. Maybe. I suppose. Before it's an issue. But filling up the gap between the glass and the woodwork on the inside, apart from making it more waterproof, because you know, I mean, in the winter the condensate running down in old houses in Norway where they don't have double glazing, or where the double glazing isn't very airtight, the inner window's not airtight, you have the condensate running down the glass, and that happens every day. Even though it's cold outside, it happens every day. And also the wood is perhaps warmer than it would be outside because it's heated in the winter. So I don't think actually windows do. I think of it. I don't think windows do rot in the winter in Norway, because actually the wood is too cold. No, it's not going to rot if it's below 10 degrees in the wood, however wet it is. The rotting happens mostly in the summer, and it happens really quickly when it's warm. It's a kind of metabolic thing. loose stuff. Already now my gnarly finger's tired from doing this because you have to press very hard to use your finger like that. But I do like to use my fingers because I can feel if I've done the job. You can feel, you know, if it's full or. A lot of this handwork for me is very tactile. I think about it a lot when I'm filming because I'm trying to describe what I'm doing a little bit in this case. But a lot of the time when I work, my consciousness sits kind of more in my hands than it does in my head. So I have kind of hyper awareness of how things feel, I suppose you could say. And I think that's probably quite important, it's the handwork. You know, the tools become an extension of the hand, so you kind of feel through the tool as well. I mean, I do that a lot with the axe, feeling the way the wood is cutting. It's great doing this because it also sounds better. It all kind of tightens up and it stops that kind of rattly sound that you have in old Windows. Stops the vibrations that sometimes even breaks the glass, you know, like when a window opens in the wind, for example. It's sometimes the glass breaks because it's a bit rattly in the frame, so you have to vibrate so much that it breaks. So I don't know, whenever I do these chatty films, I always feel like I start talking to shit. And I know that some people, some people complain about not being able to hear what I'm saying, that they might miss something, but really, you don't need to worry about that. You've got to take everything I say also with a pinch of salt because, you know, can't be sure about all of this stuff. We just try and get there. We try and get to a good result, and by whatever clever means we can garner from our own experience and other people's. I mean, I love looking at other people doing stuff like this. I sometimes wish that other hand workers would make slower films of what they're doing. They always say that, you know, they're skipping stuff because it's boring, but of course, yeah, it is boring for people who aren't interested in the little details. But a channel like this is never going to be a commercial success, whatever, you know, it's just never going to happen because it's not the right. It doesn't appeal to a broad enough audience, and the AIs are not going to like it, and I'm not advertising anything, so the advertisers are not going to advertise with me because I'm not saying I like this or that product. And since YouTube are interested in advertising revenue, they're interested in people making films that advertisers are interested in advertising with. Okay, those are the bottom edges. So I mean, in a way, I'm actually going to leave those because I think probably it's technically better to do that. But the top edges do need to be done. That's the very important bit. Nice and waterproof off the glass. And you know, when I paint, I also have a ball of putty in my hand, because if there are any pinholes in what I'm doing now, I'll fill them at that point. There's a kind of option here now to fill up woodwork and stuff in these little gaps. Make it look tighter, but I'm only going to do the top edge. I'm not going to do that bottom edge because that's good letting the air in. So as much as you can make this top edge waterproof on the inside, the better, because the condensate will now run off the bar here and just drip down to the bottom. Clearly it is better to actually sort out some of the issues with Windows, because it stops condensate on the outer window. So there is an earlier film that shows making a double, adjusting a frame, making it so that it has two glass right next to each other. In the 1950s they used to put a new inner window on the inside of the frame, out here somewhere, kind of further away. But modern people are very convenience orientated, and so they like to just have one window that opens but that is double glazed, and that is possible to do that with these old windows. Done it many times, and it's quite successful, I think, and to some extent it might actually even prolong the longevity of the window, because it stops the problem of getting condensate in the woodwork all the time during winter. So the average humidity content of the rails in the window is going to be lower. But then having said that, on my house I've got one that's very well insulated, two glass, and in the bathroom, but it's east facing, and that's just rotted out completely, and that's taken. I think it was probably a little bit, it might have been a little bit rotten, because it was a window from upstairs that I cut down because it was rotten and made it smaller. Yeah, it was, you know, it was like 3 panes of glass high, and I cut down to just 2, like a square. Yeah, and that one's rotted, so in the space of 20 years the bottom rail is rotted, and it's as rotted as much as the bottom rail was on this one that I showed you a minute ago. Got an opportunity to fill up cappy woodwork if there is any. Nice crisp edges, they'll be easier to paint. You can paint straight onto the wet putty. It's probably just as well to wait a couple of days before painting, but you don't have to. Linseed oil paint's very diffusion open, so it lets the gases out. Right, I'm going to cut some glass for that last piece. And well, this probably is like the part 2. It's a completion of that original film I made very many years ago, which never had a part 2 because the glazing I'd forgotten to film. So there we go. That's glazing for you. Bye bye.